All right, we are back, and we are going to be talking to Jeff Berwick of dollarvigilante.com. Jeff, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you, Stefan?
I'm great. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good.
All right, so Dollar Vigilante, if I understand it correctly, your approach to imminent U.S. economics goes something like this. Zombies are going to come and eat your fiat currency. And I think I agree with you to a large degree. So you, of course, run a website, the Dollar Vigilante, an Austrian economics site grounded. You run a financial newsletter. You cover economics and politics, and you are focused on the demise of the fiat currency financial system. And you hope, I think, as we all do, a likely return to something solid like gold as money. So what's the case for where the dollar is heading, and how imminent do you think a fiscal realignment might be?
I think everything has to start in 1971, August 15th, 1971, when Richard Nixon took the gold backing away from the U.S. dollar. That was effectively the second bankruptcy of the U.S. The first one was in 1933 when they confiscated gold. The U.S. government was bankrupt at that time. That's why they had to devalue the dollar against gold. In 1971, they were also bankrupt. They would have ran out of gold within a few years if they would have kept that system alive. So they went off that system, and what that did was it put the entire world onto a fiat currency system. So an absolutely nothing backing it system. The entire world was on it for the first time ever. And at the same time, all these fascist, socialistic, democratic nation states all around the Western world, at least, were in full force. So when you have governments like these have a no backing behind their currency and have central banks that can print up as much money as they need, we end up in a situation which is where we're at today. And this system actually almost collapsed in 1979, 1980, because they had already almost destroyed it. But because the government only had 10 years at that point to build up debt, they still hadn't built up enough debt to actually collapse the system. So what happened then was they allowed the interest rate to reach its natural market level, which they never do, but in that case they did, and it went to 18%. And because of that, it stopped the inflation that was going on all over the place. But they can't do that anymore because now there's too much government debt. The U.S. government has $16 trillion in total debt. Their total debt and liabilities is over $75 trillion. So even if they let the interest rates rise to 10% right now, every penny of U.S. government tax theft revenue would go just to pay the interest on their debt. So this system is dead. George Soros said this just recently, and I never agree with him, but I agree with him in this one case. He said that in 2008, the financial system died, and I agree with him, it did. And all they're doing now is papering it over, and we'll eventually head into hyperinflation probably within a few years, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and the entire system will collapse at that point. And we're seeing all the evidence, all the symptoms of this going on around the world. There's protests and rallies and things going on all over. You look at the Eurozone. It's in the state of collapse. Everywhere it's in a state of collapse right now. And so people better get used to the fact that things are going to change dramatically. Everything that we've seen for the last 40 years has been built on a bubble of debt, which was unnatural and a non-free market system, basically. So what people need to understand is what happened for the last 40 years was not really all that real economically, and it's going to be a dramatic paradigm shift happening in the next few years.
Right. And I mean, I agree with all of that, of course. And one of the things that I really like about the work that you do, Jeff, is that there are lots of people who say we're doomed, but you have an escape tunnel. You are digging your way to freedom. So what are the suggestions would you make for people, given the knowledge that we have about the cycle of history and where things are going, the fact that fiat currencies rarely last more than a generation. So, from 1971 to now, 40-odd years, it's not going to last. What should people do?
Yeah, it's very interesting right now. If you look back 100 years ago, a lot of people were coming from around the world to the U.S., to Ellis Island, because of the freedom that was in the U.S. and the opportunity that was in the U.S. And now it's the exact opposite. People are fleeing the U.S. People are fleeing the Western world. The people who live in Europe, many of them are going to South America for opportunities. People in the U.S., you look at people like Edward Savran from Facebook. He left to Singapore just recently last week. Denise Rich left. She's a billionaire. She left to Austria. Many people are fleeing now, and it's because the system is dying. And it's quite important, I think, for people to realize it's not the entire world that's in a terrible shape. It's really mostly just the Western world, because the Western world was the ones that really bought into the socialist, fascist, democratic nation-state system with central banking, and all based on debt, all based on these Keynesian fallacies that you can actually be wealthier by printing money, which if that was the case, Zimbabweans would be the richest people on earth. So it's really important for people to realize all this and open their eyes and to look at other opportunities. I am originally from Canada, but I defected about 10 years ago. I lived around the world. I lived in Thailand. I currently live in Mexico, which is by far the freest country in North America, and the safest, by the way. All that media stuff is well overblown. And so people need to look at things that are opportunities around the world. And so some of the things we talked about at the Dollar Vigilante are, and number one for Americans is if you have assets, if you have any sort of real money, which not many people do anymore thanks to the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government, but if you do, get a second passport. It's incredibly crucial. It's probably the most important thing you can have at this moment in time because it gives you some options. Not many people realize, but Americans can't open a brokerage account anywhere outside of the U.S. Because of the recently passed FATCA ruling. Almost any bank outside of the U.S. will not accept American clients. They'll accept North Koreans, they'll accept Iranians, they'll accept anyone except for Americans. Americans at this point in time are the most globally enslaved people in history. They really, once they leave their own borders, they can't do anything anymore. So it's really important to, if you can, to get a second passport, and that's one of the things we do. One of the things we talk about a lot is how to get that, how to get foreign residency, and even how to expatriate.
Right. So get assets if you can. At least have the option to legally get your assets out. Now, of course, I mean, getting a second passport seems like years of paperwork and bureaucracy. It's not as bad as people think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, every country has different rules for how to get a passport. You could even, if you have genetics, if your grandfather or your parents were from, for example, Poland or Ireland, you might be able to get a passport over there. And that can happen very quickly as well. There's different countries that have different lengths of time. We've actually been going around the world negotiating with governments because we see how important and how time-sensitive this is for people to get this before the doors really close in the U.S. And I see them closing every day. The U.S. government is doing stuff almost every day to close the doors for capital controls and people controls. You just look at what they did with the Expatriation Act. Anti-Expatriation Act by Charles Schumer after Edward Sutherland left. That was, one of the Charles Schumer's prized tax slave cows, and he escaped. Someone left the gate open, and Charles Schumer almost lost his mind, and he ceded the Anti-Expatriation Act. That was the name of the act. So basically, they're saying they don't want to allow anyone to leave anymore, and so it's really important. There's certain countries you can get them in as quickly as 6 weeks in a place like Cambodia. It's very expensive, but you can. There's also a place like Dominica, St. Kitts, where you can get it in a few months. We know of opportunities in Paraguay to get it within 8 months. You can do it we've negotiated a deal with the Dominican Republic to do it within a year and a half. So there's all sorts of options, and so people really should be taking a look at that if they can.
Yeah, it certainly is true that when the taxed livestock begin eyeing the fence, the government tends to up the voltage. I was just thinking when you were talking about, we're subject to all of these increasing socialism and Keynesianism. To me, it's just a form of creeping state socialism and communism and all of this. One of the things that drives me in the work that I do to keep talking about the non-aggression principle, property rights, and the evils of statism is, I come from an aristocratic English-Irish background. And, the aristocracy, yes, it's true, we had all the gold we could eat, but we also had to fight all the wars. And in my family, masses of men were lost in the First World War. My mother's side is sort of German, and my father's side, of course, is English-Irish. 40 million lives lost in the Second World War fighting socialism, fighting communism. And it's just horrible how so many lives were lost to fight this ideology, which then squirted its way across the Atlantic and infected North America and continues to infect Europe. I mean, the only way that I know to best honor my family dead is to continue on the fight on an intellectual level that they couldn't achieve at a physical level. So I just wanted to sort of share that with you because it is really tragic the degree to which the West fought all of these ideologies and then ended up swallowing them wholesale.
Yeah, I totally agree, Stefan. And you look at the Vietnam War. All of these wars, that was the reason they said they were having the wars, but they weren't the actual reason. The real reason is these nation states and these central banks really like war. It's very profitable for them, especially the central banks, and gives them an excuse to print lots of money. So they just make up excuses. You just look at the Iraq War. They just made up an excuse. They made up a lie. It's all admitted to now, and now George Bush just laughs and laughs at dinners about the WMDs that they can't find. And they're still over there in Iraq, and there's people still dying every day. Now under Barack, the Obama Prince of Peace, Nobel Peace Prize winner, who's drone bombing people around the world every day still. So yeah, these concepts, they were mostly just things to get people to go off to fight, but they were all lies. Almost every war the U.S. has been in for the last 100 years has been under the pretense of a lie. Vietnam was that's all been proven now, that the Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag attack upon their own ship to enter into that war. The Iraq War was WMDs. That was all a lie. And the Afghanistan War is all based on 9/11, which the official story is the craziest conspiracy theory I've ever heard. So, all of these things are all based on lies. These states and central banks are mankind's biggest enemy. They've killed, the nation states alone killed 260 million people last century. And yet people still, because of their indoctrination, being sent off to 12 years of public indoctrination camps, they believe the state is good. It's just... All
right, sorry to interrupt you, Jeff. If you can hang on, we'll come back to you after the break. This is Stefan Molyneux for The Peter Schiff Show. We will be right back.
The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, with Jeff Berwick, he of the eye patch with the dollar on front, the dollar vigilante. So, Jeff, what case would you make about the urgency? What are people going to face if they don't act to protect what assets that they have?
I think you really just, if you are paying attention to what's going on, every day now the U.S. government is doing something to close doors, to militarize the police. They're trying to get as many people into the criminal system as possible, and that will make it so they can't travel or get a second passport. There's 30% of people under the age of 23 have been arrested in the U.S. It's a complete criminal police state in the U.S. now. They're trying to do everything to make sure that people can't get out at this point. And, you even go to the airports, they have cash sniffing dogs at the international airports. And as you walk down the jetway to the airplane, there'll be people there and they'll ask you how much money you have. And right now they're just asking, but pretty soon they'll be saying you can't take it with you. It'd be very easy for them to flip that switch. So these things are happening every day. People really need to wake up, stop listening to the mainstream media, which are all basically propaganda and lies. Stop listening to mostly to your government registered financial advisor, because they're not going to tell you too many of these things. They're not going to tell you to get some of your money outside of the country. Really do your own research. Go to sites like ours, dollarvigilante.com, or listen to many other people out there like yourself, Stefan, who are speaking the truth, and pay attention to what's going on. This is going to be the biggest event in human history over the next few years, and they're not going to tell you or prepare you for what's going to happen. So you have to do your own research.
And so what do you see on the other side of this? And, the longer problems tend to last, the worse they tend to get at the end. The longer you keep something that can't fly aloft, the harder it tends to fall. What do you think? I mean, I know, libertarians and others we consider to be doomsayers a lot of times, but that doesn't mean that doom isn't coming. What do you see on the other side? Obviously, there would be significant restrictions on capital. There may be significant restrictions on occupation. There certainly will be, I think, significant restrictions on capital flight, increased taxes, and so on. What do you see on the other side? What's it going to look like if and when the hammer comes down?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're pessimistic. I think we're optimistic that we know the system's going to end. This has been the worst system ever in human history. It's killed more people. It's impoverished more people than anything ever has in history. Hundreds of millions dead, tens or hundreds of trillions of dollars destroyed through the wars brought on by states, which are all funded by the central banks. You can't even have these wars without inflation brought on by central banks because people don't want to pay for them. So it's really optimistic that this is going to end. The problem is getting through to the other side, which I call the Great Transition. It'll probably take a couple of years. It all depends, as you say, Stefan, on what the governments do. If they go quietly, this could be over very quickly. It doesn't even have to be that difficult. And very quickly, we can start to rebuild. You just look at a place like Hong Kong, how quickly it grew from nothing. It was a small fishing village just 50 years ago, and look at it today. Look at Hiroshima, which was bombed into oblivion in World War II. It's now a glistening city, mostly because it's mostly free market. These are the free markets at work. They can do amazing things if they're allowed to function. I think I'm actually optimistic because of the internet. I think without the internet, I'd just go live on a seastead and I'd be waiting for my next ticket out to a outer space colony if I could get one. But thanks to the internet, we have the opportunity to spread this information. The more that people understand this and know this, the more prepared they'll be, the easier the transition will be. But I really wouldn't want to be in a major city in the U.S. over the next few years.
Right. Of course, the big danger of cities is interruptions in the food supply. Cities actually grew out of sort of 12th, 13th century when they finally figured out that to put a harness on the horse that didn't choke it and figured out how to do winter crops and rotate, you actually got the excess food that was required for cities. And cities can be tricky places to be in if there are interruptions in the food supply. And when there are currency problems, there are usually interruptions in the food supply. So again, not to sound like all kinds of tinfoil hatty, but I think it's worth getting a little bit of extra food in the basement. I think it's worth checking out dollarvigilante.com or other places where you find good financial advice. And thanks so much again for your time, Jeff, this morning. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. Keep up the great work.
Thanks. All right. Do we have Brian from Wisconsin who wants to talk about economic calculation? Hold on to your hats. This is gripping stuff. As he rambles, see if we can get Brian back. Well, so just before we get to the break, here's a little bit of data for you. Let's throw a few facts into the mix and shock everyone. So Obama was recently talking about, we just got to raise taxes on the rich. We just got to raise taxes on the rich and all will be well. Do you know how mad that is? You wonder if these people, if they're just completely bald-faced liars or if they don't even know their own data. So the Wall Street Journal did a calculation which is fascinating and chilling. And so the idea, of course, raise taxes on the rich, we can pay for everything. And don't worry, right? What is it Thatcher used to say? Government is the delusion that somebody else will always pay for everything, that you can get rich by stealing from other people. And so if we sort of say that the do we have Brian back? Is he back? Let's find out. Paul, okay, we'll come back to this later. Let's talk to Paul. Paul, my fellow Canuck, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great.
So, what's your question? What's your comment?
Okay, well, I just had a comment about your second guest, or about your first guest. Like, he keeps saying how the powers that be or whatever are going to keep suppressing gold, and I don't think that's the case because gold's the only thing that can consolidate wealth without disrupting everything else, right? Like, you can, if the gold price goes up to 20 grand an ounce, that isn't going to affect gas, oil, or food or anything, right?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry, can you just explain to us? So let's say that gold goes to $20,000 an ounce. How would that affect things?
Well, I'm saying it would be better for all this money floating around to consolidate in gold than it would be to just go into other commodities and stuff, Like if all this wealth that's, say the treasury bubble bursts, if all that money goes into oil and all these other speculations, that's going to just disrupt everything. But if it all goes into gold and the gold price goes up, the average person ain't going to be affected. And the reason... Well,
no. So, but gold is an effect, right? So if fiat currency becomes less valuable, which would happen really basically if they're just printing money to pay off the debt. It's called a soft default. It's when you don't have enough money to pay off your debt, and they can't drive interest rates down any further because they're effectively zero, at least in the U.S. So they just start printing money like crazy, and you get hyperinflation. So the $20,000 an ounce gold would be an effect of hyperinflation, which would be an effect of overprinting of the money supply. And so that would have a huge effect on people on fixed incomes. If you're getting $2,000 a month out of some annuity and your money is worth 10% of what it used to, you're effectively you're down to $200. It's going to have a massive, catastrophic effect on people. So a lot of people have money in gold, so it's going to have a huge effect.
in the Eurozone.
Listen, we
there's
gotta take a break. We gotta take a break. Hang on, we'll see if we can talk to you after the break, or maybe you can send a message another way. But this is Stefan Molyneux for the Peter Schiff Show. We'll be right back.